What would you do if a little girl knocked on your apartment door at midnight, bleeding through her coat sleeve, and the only name she could give you was the man who owned half of Chicago? Nora Callahan had been awake anyway. That was the thing she kept coming back to later, after everything unraveled and remade itself into something she didn't have a word for. She had been sitting at her kitchen table with a mug of tea gone cold and a stack of bills she'd been avoiding since Tuesday. The rent notice was on top. It always found its way to the top, no matter how many times she buried it under the others. She worked the early shift at St. Clement's, a public hospital in the South Loop that smelled like industrial cleaner and too many years of hard decisions. She was a nurse's aide. Technically, though, she'd completed 2 of 4 years toward her RN before her father's health had made finishing impossible. The hospital didn't care about unfinished degrees. They cared about whether you showed up and whether you could hold someone's hand without flinching. Nora was good at both. Her father, Dennis Callahan, had been on dialysis for 11 months. 3 times a week, a van picked him up from the apartment 2 floors below hers. The same building, her idea. So she could check on him without either of them admitting how scared they were. Dennis said he was fine so often the word had lost all meaning. Nora had stopped counting the times she'd sat in billing offices and smiled at people who spoke gently about payment plans while their eyes said something colder. The knock came at 12:17 in the morning. She almost didn't answer. The building had a buzzer system that half the residents ignored, and her neighbor, Mrs. Petrakis, sometimes locked herself out after her evening walk. But something about the sound was different. Too small, too careful, like whoever made it was afraid of being too loud and also afraid of being too quiet. Nora opened the door. The girl on the other side was maybe 10 years old, dark-haired, wearing a navy school coat with a crest on the pocket that Nora vaguely recognized as one of the private academies near the lake. She was pressing her left forearm against her stomach. The sleeve of the coat was dark and wet in a way that had nothing to do with rain. Nora was already pulling her inside before she finished processing what she was seeing. "Sit down," she said. "Right here, on the floor. It's okay." The girl sat. Her breathing was controlled in the way of someone who had been told not to cry and had believed them. That broke Nora's heart before anything else did. "What's your name?" "Sophia," the girl said. "Sophia, I'm gonna look at your arm. Is that okay?" A nod. The cut was long but not deep, running along the outer forearm from a fall. Not an attack. Nora read it in the direction and shape of the wound, in the gravel still embedded near the edges. She'd fallen hard against something. A curb or a wall. The coat had slowed the bleeding, but the sleeve was soaked through. Nora moved without thinking. First aid kit under the sink. Clean cloth, pressure, then assessment, then clean, then close if needed. Her hands were steady. They were always steady when something needed her to be. "Where did you fall?" she asked while she worked. "Outside. I was trying to get home and I didn't know which door." Sophia's voice was careful, like she was measuring out each word. "Where's home?" The girl looked at her for a long moment. Her eyes were very dark, very direct. Too much gravity in them for someone her age. "My father will come," Sophia said. "If I call him, he'll come." "Does your father know where you are?" "No." Nora pressed gauze to the wound and looked at the girl. "Sophia, I need to call someone. A parent, a guardian, someone who knows you're here." "Just him." Sophia reached into her coat pocket with her good hand and produced a phone, small and expensive, the kind Nora had never owned. She held it out. "His number is in there. He's the only one I call." Nora took the phone. The contact at the top of the recent calls was listed only as Dad. The number below it had no area code she recognized. She dialed. It rang 3 times, then a man answered. He did not say hello. He said Sophia. One word, and the way he said it told Nora everything and nothing. It told her that this man had been waiting for this call, without knowing he was waiting for it. That the sound of his daughter's name in his own voice was the thing he reached for first, before sense, before question. "Mister," she started. "Where is she?" Not a question, a fact being demanded. Nora gave her address. She told him Sophia had a laceration on her forearm that had been cleaned and dressed, that she was calm and coherent, that she needed to be checked further but was not in immediate danger. She spoke the way she spoke to families in the waiting room. Clear, direct, no false softness. There was a pause on the line. "You're a nurse," the man said. "Nurse's aide, at St. Clement's." Another pause, longer this time. "Don't let her out of your sight." The line went dead. Nora set the phone on the table and looked at Sophia, who was watching her with a careful expression of a child who had learned to read rooms before she learned to read books. "Is he coming?" Sophia asked. "Yes." Sophia nodded like she had expected this, and arranged herself more comfortably against the cabinet, the gauze-wrapped arm resting in her lap. "How long have you been a nurse?" Nora sat on the floor across from her. "Long enough." "Do you like it?" "Most days." Sophia considered this. "My mother was a doctor. She said medicine was the only honest job she knew, because you couldn't lie to someone's body. It either worked or it didn't." Nora looked at the girl. "Was." Sophia met her eyes. "She died 2 years ago. Ovarian cancer. She caught it late." "I'm sorry." Sophia accepted this the way children accept difficult things when no one has taught them to perform grief. Quietly, without argument. "My father doesn't talk about it. He talks around it. Like if he says exactly the right things in exactly the right order, the edges won't show." Nora didn't answer immediately. Outside, the city made its usual sounds. A bus, a siren rising and falling a few blocks east, the radiator in the hallway knocking against its own heat. "What's your father's name?" she asked. The girl looked at her with something almost like amusement. "You'll find out in about 8 minutes." They was 7. The knock at her door was nothing like Sophia's. It was the knock of a man who had never needed to be tentative about taking up space. Nora opened the door. Carter Westbrook was taller than the doorframe wanted to allow. He wore a dark wool coat over a shirt that had been expensive this morning and was now wrinkled at the collar, the way clothes get when a person forgets to care about them. His hair was dark with threads of early gray at the temples. His jaw was set with the particular tension of a man holding himself responsible for something that had already happened, which meant he could not stop it, but intended to make up for it through sheer controlled force of will. His eyes went to Sophia first. They didn't leave her for a long moment. Then they moved to the wrapped arm, then to Nora. "Show me," he said. Nora took him through the cleaning and dressing without editorializing. She told him the cut had stopped bleeding, that she didn't think it would need stitches, that Sophia should be checked for any bruising on the elbow and shoulder from the impact. She said all of this in her professional voice, the one that didn't waver. And Carter Westbrook listened with the focus of a man who was used to receiving information and acting on it, and did not appreciate sentiment getting in the way of facts. When she finished, he crouched in front of Sophia. "You left the car," he said. "I got out at the light." Sophia held his gaze without blinking. "You were going to drive me past the bookstore again, and I wanted to stop." "I told you." "I know what you told me." Sophia looked at her arm. "I wasn't trying to scare you." Something moved across his face, quick and private, gone before most people would have caught it. Nora caught it. He stood, reached into his coat and produced a slim wallet. He pulled out a card and held it toward Nora. "For your time. And for the—" She didn't take it. He looked at her. "I didn't do anything that requires payment," she said. She fell. "I helped." "That's not a transaction." Westbrook lowered the card. His expression didn't change, but his eyes did something complicated, like he was recalibrating. "What do I owe you then?" "Nothing." Nora picked up her mug, which was still cold. "Make sure someone actually walks her to the door next time." The words came out quieter than she intended, not softer, just quieter. Carter Westbrook looked at her for a long moment. Sophia was watching them both with undisguised interest. "You work nights at St. Clement's," he said. "Early shift. I just finished." "That hospital's funding was cut last quarter." Nora met his gaze. "I'm aware." "You're aware," he repeated, not argued, not corrected, aware. She didn't answer that. She opened the door wider. Carter Westbrook guided Sophia toward the hallway with one hand at the back of her shoulder, protective but not smothering, careful in a way that suggested he had been practicing careful for 2 years and still wasn't sure he had the shape of it right. At the threshold, he paused. "My name is Westbrook," he said, "in case you didn't know. I know who you are." He looked back at her. His expression was unreadable in the way of men who have made unreadability a discipline. "Most people say that differently," he said. "Most people mean it differently." He held her gaze one beat too long. Then he walks down the hallway, his daughter beside him without looking back. Nora closed the door and stood in her kitchen for several minutes. The bills were still on the table. The tea was still cold. Nothing had changed, and the whole room felt different in a way she couldn't account for. She didn't hear from him for 5 days. On the 6th day, a man she didn't recognize was waiting near the staff entrance of St. Clement's when she finished her shift. He was polite, quiet, and handed her an envelope with the kind of practiced neutrality that suggested he had handed many envelopes to many people, and none of them had been casual situations. Inside the envelope was a card, black, heavy stock, no logo. A number. On the back, in handwriting that was direct and unadorned, "If Sophia ever needs something and I'm not available." Nora put the card in her coat pocket and went home. She thought about throwing it away for 3 days before she admitted she wasn't going to. 2 weeks after that, she was reassigned. Not fired. St. Clement's didn't fire people outright. They redistributed. Her hours on the floor were cut and she was moved to administrative support 2 days a week, which paid less and mattered less, and was the kind of change that happened to people who asked too many questions about billing practices, or noticed discrepancies between what was charged and what was actually provided. Nora had done both of those things in the past month because her father's dialysis records didn't match the invoices she'd seen in the system. And when she'd raised it with her supervisor, the conversation had ended in a way that was technically polite and unmistakably final. She didn't use the card. She applied for 3 other positions, got 2 interviews, and was told by both that they would be in touch. They were not in touch. Her father didn't know any of this. She kept it from him the way he kept his pain scores from her, both of them performing fine so the other one could rest. It was her father who used the card. Not intentionally. He didn't know about it, but he collapsed during a dialysis session in late February, and the attending physician at St. Clement's flagged his chart for transfer to a higher care facility, and when Nora arrived at the hospital, the billing clerk handed her a form that required a deposit she didn't have access to in the next 40 minutes, or the transfer would be delayed, and she stood in the corridor outside her father's room holding that form and understanding with absolute clarity what it felt like when a system designed to appear functional revealed that it was not. She made a call. Westbrook answered on the 2nd ring. She did not introduce herself. She said, "This is Nora Callahan. You gave Sophia my number. I'm at St. Clement's, and I need—" "I know who you are." His voice was even. "What do you need?" "Not money," she said immediately, and then stopped because the situation made the sentence absurd. A pause. Then Westbrook said, "Tell me what's happening." She told him. All of it, because there wasn't time to curate and because something in his voice made editing feel like a waste of both their time. The transfer, the deposit, the billing discrepancy she'd flagged, the way her hours had shifted afterward. She said it all in the flat, factual tone she used for patient reports, and when she finished there was a silence on the line that felt different from absence. "Stay where you are," he said. She stayed. He arrived in 22 minutes. Nora knew, because she counted. He came without a coat this time, or rather with one he hadn't bothered to button, and the calm he wore when he walked through the hospital's main entrance was the particular calm of a man who had decided something and was implementing it in real time. He did not go to billing first. He went to her. She was in the hallway outside her father's room. He stopped a few feet away and, for a moment, neither of them spoke. "You should have called sooner," he said. "That's not how this works." His jaw moved. "How does it work?" Nora looked at him. "You have money and I have a problem. Those 2 things being in the same room doesn't mean I need you to fix it." Westbrook looked at her for a long moment. His expression was controlled. Something underneath it was not. "What does it mean then?" She didn't have an answer for that, not one she was ready to say. He went to billing. She didn't follow him, but she heard enough through the corridor, not shouting. Westbrook didn't shout. The tone of a man who spoke quietly precisely because he did not need volume to make something happen. And the woman at the billing desk was on the phone within 4 minutes, and the form question resolved itself in 6. The transfer went through. Her father was moved without delay. Westbrook found her again in the corridor. She was sitting in a plastic chair with her coat in her lap and her hands flat on her knees, looking at the floor. He sat beside her, not close, correct distance, like he was being careful about something. "Thank you," she said. "The words cost something." "Don't." She looked at him. "Don't what?" "Make it formal," he said. "You stayed with my daughter for 2 hours. You didn't ask for anything. You dressed her arm and sat on the floor with her." He paused. "Don't thank me like I'm a stranger." Nora looked at him for a long time. He held it without looking away, which most people didn't. "She's a remarkable kid," Nora said finally. Something happened in his face, small, controlled, significant. "She is," he said. "She does things that terrify me and then explains them so clearly I can't argue with her logic." He was quiet for a moment. Her mother was the same way. Nora didn't speak. She understood that some sentences needed room. Westbrook looked at the floor. She was treating a patient on the day she collapsed. She kept saying she was fine. He stopped. "I told myself she was fine because she said she was, and because I was on a call I thought was important, and because fine is easier to believe than the alternative." Nora's chest tightened. "The call was about a property acquisition," he said. "I still own the building." She heard the wound in that. The specific, precise way he'd constructed a monument out of regret without naming it. "You're not going to forget that," she said. "But it also didn't kill her." His eyes came to her face. "She was sick before the collapse." The outcome was, Nora stopped. Then went on. "Because he deserved honesty more than comfort. The outcome was probably the same either way. But I know that doesn't make it feel that way." Westbrook was very still. "No," he said, "it doesn't." They sat in the hospital corridor for another few minutes without speaking. The sounds of the ward moved around them. Wheels, voices, the intercom calling a code 2 floors up, normal sounds. Nora had always found them steadying. He asked her to dinner 3 days later. She said no. Then she said maybe. Then she said, "I don't know what you want from this." And he said, "I'm not sure either." And that was somehow the most honest thing either of them had said to each other. And she said, "Dinner is fine." He took her to a restaurant near the river she had walked past 100 times without ever considering she might go inside. The kind of place with no prices on the menu and candlelight that did exactly what it was supposed to. She wore the best dress she owned, which was nice enough to wear and not expensive enough for this room, and Carter Westbrook looked at her when she arrived and did not look at the dress at all, which was either very smooth or very genuine, and she spent the first half hour deciding which. He asked about her father. He asked about nursing school, why she'd stopped, what she'd planned. He didn't ask in the way people sometimes asked, with the subtext of "isn't that a shame" or "what a waste." He asked like he was building a map and wanted accurate information. She told him. About her father's diagnosis, the shift in money, the incomplete degree, the job that was supposed to be temporary and had turned into almost 3 years. She said it plainly. Because she had long since stopped apologizing for the circumstances of her life to people who hadn't earned the right to her apology. Westbrook listened without offering solutions. That surprised her. "You're not going to tell me to finish the degree," she said. "You didn't ask me what to do." "Most people fill that in anyway." He looked at her. "I've had enough people fill things in for me." He picked up his glass. "I find I prefer the actual version." "The actual version of what?" "Whatever's in front of me." Nora looked at him across the candlelight. He was harder to read in low light, more angles. The gray at his temples looked deliberate, like something that had been earned rather than happened to him. "Why did you give Sophia my number?" He set his glass down. "She asked me to." "She asked you." He nodded once. "She said." He paused, and something shifted in his expression, the way it did when he was quoting someone he loved and being careful not to flatten the original. "She said the woman who put a pillow under her arm and sat on the floor with her without being asked was the kind of person we should know how to reach." Nora was quiet for a moment. "She uses the word we," she said. She has since her mother died. Westbrook's jaw tightened slightly, then released. I think she decided the two of us were a unit that needed managing. He looked briefly at the window. She's not wrong. The dinner lasted 2 hours and ended without incident. He walked her to the car he'd arranged because she declined his, and at the curb he said good night without reaching for her, without any of the movements men sometimes made to take credit for an evening. She took the car home and sat in her apartment for a long time afterward, with no particular thought, just the feeling of having been seen by someone who was looking. She found out 3 days later that one of her colleagues at St. Clement's had been let go. The official reason was restructuring. The unofficial reason moved through the staff like weather, quiet and directional. Her colleague had been the one who'd first corroborated Nora's billing concerns, had signed his name below hers on the internal report. Nora went home and looked up the hospital's board of directors. The third name was a man who managed 2 property companies and sat on 2 charitable foundations. His name appeared in 3 articles alongside Carter Westbrook's over the past 4 years. 2 mergers, 1 zoning dispute that Westbrook had ultimately won. She called him. He picked up on the first ring. "You know a man named Gerald Shea," she said. The pause was exactly long enough. "I know of him," Westbrook said. "We've operated in adjacent circles. Why?" "He's on St. Clement's board." She told him the rest. The billing discrepancy, the report she'd filed, the colleague who'd just been let go, the pattern that was too deliberate to be coincidence. Westbrook was quiet for a moment that had weight in it. "You've been keeping records," he said. She had, in a notebook, in the small handwriting she used when she didn't want to run out of page. "You were going to take this somewhere," he said, "before your hours were cut." "I was going to take it to the state health department." She paused. "I still am." Another pause. Then, "Shea sits on 2 other hospital boards. If this is what you're describing, it's not isolated." "I know." Westbrook's voice changed. Not warmer, more precise. Like something had come into focus. "Did you know that before or after you called me?" "Before." He was quiet. "I didn't call you because of Shea," she said. "I called you because of my father. Those are separate things." "Are they?" She looked at the notebook on her table. "I need them to be." He didn't argue. He said, "Send me what you have, not for me to use, for me to know what we're dealing with." The word landed differently than she expected. She noticed that and set it aside. She sent him the records. He called her the next morning. He told her that Shea had been managing contracts between St. Clement's and 2 private suppliers for the past 6 years. That the billing inconsistencies she'd found were consistent across at least 3 other patients his legal team had now reviewed, and that what she had found was not a small error or an isolated case but a coordinated practice, deliberate and deniable, and running on the assumption that the people most affected were the least positioned to fight it. "People like my father," she said. "And yours," he said. "And hundreds of others." Nora sat with that. "What happens now?" she asked. Westbrook's voice was careful. "I can take this to people who will act on it. The exposure alone will end Shea's position. Possibly more than that. But it will take time, and you will be interviewed, and your name will be attached to this in ways that are not going to be comfortable." She looked at the notebook. "I know," she said. He said, "You don't have to be." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "I can attribute the discovery to my legal team. Your name stays out." She heard him, then heard the space around what he was saying. "And Shea never knows I found it." "Correct." She thought about the colleague who'd been let go, about the billing clerk who'd spoken gently about payment plans with cold eyes, about her father in the dialysis chair 3 times a week, and the invoices that didn't match. "No," she said. Westbrook went quiet. "My name stays on it." She said it without heat. "If it's worth doing with my name on it." The silence on the line was different from his usual silences. She couldn't read it. Then he said, "All right." Just that. She had expected more. An argument or a warning or a pragmatic countercase. She had prepared for those. All right was not one of the things she had prepared for. She went to the state health department with her records. Westbrook's legal team came with her, not instead of her, beside her, which she had not asked for and which she noticed. The official she met with was a small, focused woman who read the documentation with the expression of someone who had suspected something like this existed and was not surprised to be right. The investigation took 6 weeks. Shay was removed from St. Clement's board in the 4th week, quietly enough that most of the staff didn't hear about it in time to react. The billing practice was suspended. A formal review of 3 other facilities followed. Nora's hours were restored. Her colleague was rehired. She went back to the floor and put her stethoscope around her neck and carried someone's grandmother from a wheelchair to a bed and felt, for the first time in months, like the ground beneath her was something she could rely on. She saw Carter Westbrook on a Tuesday evening in the lobby of her building. He was standing near the mailboxes, which meant he'd come past the buzzer because her neighbor Mrs. Petrakis had let him in, which meant he'd spoken to Mrs. Peck, Petrakis, and charmed her in whatever way he charmed people when he had decided to. He was holding a folder. She looked at it. "Not medical," he said. "Not legal." She looked at him. He set it on top of the mailboxes, a position at the foundation my wife started, overseeing patient advocacy for St. Clement's and 4 other South Loop facilities. It would include completing your nursing degree on the foundation's dime. He paused. "You would report to a board, not to me." She looked at the folder. "Why?" "Because you found something that 12 people with more resources and more access missed. Because you sat on the floor with my daughter. Because," he stopped, and for the first time since she had met him, Carter Westbrook looked like a man choosing his next word with more care than usual. "Because you told me the honest thing about my wife when you could have told me the kind thing and they were different and I needed the honest one." Nora looked at him for a long moment. "You're not doing this for Sophia." "No," he said. "Or for the foundation." He held her gaze. "No." She picked up the folder. "I'll read it." He nodded once. He turned to go, then stopped, which she had already come to understand was his version of reaching for something he hadn't planned to say. "Sophia wants to know if you'll come to dinner Sunday. She is making pasta, which she learned from a video and has practiced twice." The second attempt was significantly better than the first. Something warm moved through Nora's chest before she could stop it. "What does she put in it?" He almost smiled. "She won't say. She calls it a professional secret." Nora looked down at the folder in her hands, then at the man in the uncareful coat and the careful eyes. "Tell her I'll bring bread." His expression shifted, not quite a smile, something more private than that. "She'll argue that you didn't need to." "I know," Nora said. "Bread is different." He looked at her for one long, unhurried moment. Then he walked out of the building and into the winter evening, and Nora stood in the lobby with a folder against her chest and the sound of the city moving around her, and she thought, not for the first time, and not for the last, that some doors opened from the inside of a crisis and led somewhere entirely unexpected, and the only honest thing to do was walk through. I keep thinking about the moment Nora opened that door. It was past midnight. She had bills on the table she hadn't opened, and tea she'd forgotten to drink. She could have pretended not to hear the knock. A lot of people would have. The building was old. The hour was wrong. And she had enough of her own problems to fill both hands. But she opened the door anyway. Not because she was fearless, but because she was the kind of person who couldn't unhear a sound that small and that careful. That choice, which cost her nothing but a few hours of sleep, changed everything that followed. Not because the universe was keeping score, but because actions have weight, and the weight of what we do for others has a way of traveling further than we expect. What struck me most about Nora wasn't her courage, though she had it. It was her honesty. When Carter asked her about his wife, really asked, the way people ask when they're desperate for the real answer instead of the kind one, she told him the truth. She said the outcome was probably the same either way. That didn't make his grief smaller. It made it cleaner. And I think that's what he'd been waiting for without knowing it. Someone who respected him enough not to wrap his pain in cotton and hand it back to him soften. That's the thing about integrity that nobody warns you about. It's uncomfortable to carry. It costs you the easy version of almost every conversation. Nora could have kept her head down at St. Clement's. She'd already done the hard part. Noticed the discrepancy. filed the report, taken the quiet punishment of reduced hours. Nobody would have blamed her for stopping there. But she kept the notebook. She kept the records. She walked into the health department with her name attached, knowing it would follow her, because she understood that the value of what she'd found depended entirely on whether she was willing to stand behind it. That takes something different from courage. It takes clarity, knowing not just what is right, but why it matters enough to cost you something. And then there's Sophia, 10 years old, bleeding through her coat, explaining herself to a stranger with more composure than most adults manage in a crisis. She'd gone looking for a bookstore. She got lost. She didn't spiral. She assessed, she used what she had, she asked for exactly what she needed. There's a kind of intelligence in that which has nothing to do with age or school or money. It's the intelligence of a person who was raised to believe that problems have solutions if you stay calm enough to find them. Her mother had been a doctor. Her father had built things from the ground up. Sophia had absorbed both of them and made something entirely her own. I think about what she said to her father later, that Nora was the kind of person they should know how to reach. She didn't say the kind of person who could help them. She said, know how to reach. That's a different thing. That's about relationship, not utility. We spend a lot of time trying to be useful. We forget to be reachable. The story ends with Nora standing in her lobby holding a folder, and the thing I keep coming back to is that she picked it up. Not because she was desperate, not because she had no other options, but because she had no other options. But because she'd earned the right to want something and decided to stop apologizing for it. That took longer than any of the rest of it. The honesty, the records, the knock at the door, those came easier than letting herself be seen as someone worth investing in. Some of us are good at giving. We're less practiced at receiving without turning it into a debt before the other person has even left the room. Nora took the folder. That was the hardest thing she did in the whole story.